Hi, I'm Femi OK and you're in the stream. Today, where is Russian state media headed and who is it serving? We'll discuss why President Putin pulled the plug on Russia's state-owned news agency. Our digital producer Malika Bilal is always looking out for your live feedback. So we're doing a story about the news. So what is our online community saying? So this news agency in Russia being replaced by a new one?
Right, exactly. Well, there are a lot of questions from people wondering what this means. And there's some skepticism from people like Amanda on Facebook. She writes in, the old agency and the new agency are one and the same anyway, and it makes no difference. I imagine we'll get a little bit of pushback to that during the course of the live conversation, but we want to hear from you at home as well. So tweet us your questions and your comments using hashtag AJStream.
I'm Chip Burley, I'm an investigative reporter, and I'm in the stream.
Russia's state-owned RIA Novosti news agency will be going off-air with no explanation given to its staff. In a move that caught many by surprise, President Vladimir Putin announced earlier this month that the organization would be replaced with a news agency called Russia Segonya, or Russia Today. Now, according to the decree, which was published on the Kremlin website, the main purpose of the new agency is to provide information on Russian state policy and Russian life and society for audiences abroad. And the move might be an indication that President Putin is reasserting his authority after the 2011 and 2012 anti-government protests, the biggest in more than a decade. Putin chose Dmitry Kiselyov, a popular conservative news anchor, as the director general of the company. Kiselyov is very well known for his staunch support of the Kremlin, as well as his anti-Western and anti-gay views. So we would like to find out, where is Russian state media headed and who will it serve? To help us talk about this, we're joined from Moscow by Mark Bennett. He's a former correspondent with RIA Novosti. He'll be joining us in just a moment. He's also the author of a forthcoming book called Kicking the Kremlin. In our Google Plus Hangout, we have Kevin Rothrock. He's a project editor for RUNET Echo, and that's a global voices project to interpret the Russian language internet. Maria Baranova is a Russian journalist who was facing a 2-year prison sentence for inciting mass disorder for participating in a 2012 protest, but she was included in today's presidential pardon. And on Skype, we have Vitaly Milonov. He is a legislative assembly member with the United Russia Party. So it's great to have you all here in the stream. So for those of us who've never seen RIA Novosti, Vitaly, what's it like? Can you describe the viewing experience?
Actually, I don't think that this is something really important for the Western listeners, because we had Russian RIA Novosti agency. Now we have a new Russian agency, and I really think that this is something deals with our internal stuff to reorganize the Russian information agency. So does it really bother you, or don't you think that our information would be really much more effective? I hope that Russian information would be really much more effective than it was before.
So you don't want anyone outside of Russia to watch RIA Novosti? Is that what you're saying, Vitaly? Because I just wanted to get an experience of it. I haven't seen it. I'd love to know what it was like to watch it, or to use some of the news agency information. And you haven't told me anything yet.
Actually, RIA Novosti was it had a big part of informational field in Russia, and with the new leader, Mr. Kiselyov, I think that they will take a much bigger part in our information pie. Okay. And because the new leader is a really talented and highly motivated person, and I think that he is able to show the real truth, what's going on in Russia right now.
All right, thank you. You give me a slightly better idea, which is great. Mark, you were chuckling. What was going on there? Why are you chuckling?
What? Sorry?
Yeah, I heard you chuckle there as Vitaly was talking. What was causing you to
because
laugh?
Vitaly started to say the word propaganda instead of information, but then quickly cut himself off. That's why I was laughing.
Right. So
which
you used
is
to work
basically
at,
what.
Sure.
Which the Kremlin hasn't even made a secret that it's going to be a propaganda agency. Putin's spokesman today, Dmitry Peskov, said Russia Today news agency would deal in propaganda in the good sense of the word.
But part of that is lost in translation, right? Because the Russians use the word propaganda, and I think it's a Western politician in that position would say something more like public outreach or something along those lines. Propaganda doesn't have the exclusively negative connotations it does in English. I'm not defending Kisidov, but I think that should be pointed out.
Well, Kevin, since you piped up there and gave us that explanation,
it's still the role of a news agency.
I want to bring in a view from online. I know that everyone wants to talk at once now, but I want to bring in a view from online because earlier I read a Facebook comment from someone who said, basically what you're saying, this is propaganda, it's all the same, what does it matter? But Bryce Jordan tweets in, RIA Novosti was a rare species of close to balanced popular Russian news. Alina says the problem with the dissolution of RIA Novosti, it was a great news organization, it was relatively independent, and it was a useful reference for international media. So Kevin, could you give us an overview, an analytical view at what made RIA different than other organizations?
So first of all, we've been talking about RIA Novosti as though it were a TV station. Most of their content was written. It was accessed online, so it was essentially sort of a newspaper, I suppose. They had various offshoots that did do video and audio and so on, but I think it's best to talk about it in terms of written content. Now, their English language division was far and away more independent-minded than their Russian content. I have an example actually. In the last week, there was an actor, a popular actor who acts on Russian television, who gave a sort of speech to a bunch of locals in Yekaterinburg, and it was a very it was a very homophobic speech. At one point, he talked about putting all gays in the oven.
Again and again, you're talking about anti-homophobic speech. No, don't you think that our country has a right to have our own Christian attitude towards these issues? Don't you think that our Russian country can be still a traditional country?
Vitaly, please, as a Russian citizen, I ask one person at a time to speak. So Maria, hold tight one moment. Vitaly, I hear the pushback, and Kevin, you were trying to make a point. Let me help you make that point, and then we'll come back to all of you. So you were talking about Dmitry Kizelyov. Now, he's been described by Vitaly as a highly talented gentleman. He's an anchor. He's going to be the Director General of this new Russia Today news agency. And I believe what you were talking about was a talk show that he was hosting. And this is how he starts off the talk show. And he has some very strong views about the homosexual community. Have a look at this.
Геев за пропаганду гомосексуализма среди подростков мало. Им нужно запретить донорство крови, спермы, а их сердца в случае автомобильной катастрофы зарывать в землю или сжигать как непригодные для продолжения чьей-либо жизни.
All right, so I know that there's conversation here, so I'm just going to ask Maria and Vitaly to hold tight. Kevin, you were trying to finish a point. Finish that point.
So I actually wasn't talking about that clip, although it's a very similar thing that the actor in Yekaterinburg said. He talked about throwing all the gays into an oven and all of their Moscow sympathizing journalists in an oven with them. And RIA Novosti ran a report on this in English, and I have a little excerpt. They described the event as something that added to a mounting mood of homophobia in the country. So that's an example of the sort of very subtle independence of what I would describe as independence of RIA Novosti, especially in English. Now that kind of little jab, it is a little jab at the homophobic environment in Russia in recent years, and that's an example, I think, of why RIA Novosti was considered something a little special, given that it was funded entirely by the federal government.
So Vitaly, is that a reason, do you think, why RIA Novosti is now no more, because of a stance like that?
I think the question of homophobia or being fan of sodomy is a question, a personal question of Kevin. Actually, in Russia, no one wants to be called sodomite.
Vitaly, it seems like Vitaly doesn't hear me, but...
So let's stay.
Something like
but Vitaly, excuse me one moment. Excuse me one moment, Vitaly. Let's stay on topic.
We do really appreciate what Mr. Kislov declared,
right.
And we do really think that sodomy and all this sins should not be proclaimed as a normal thing in our society.
So it shouldn't be in a state news agency. Is that what you're saying?
I am absolutely sure that most of Christians, most of Western world, would insist that sodomy should not be proclaimed as a normal way of life. And
all right, so I'm going to pull the conversation back to RIA Novosti and also Russia Today. Just remember what we're talking
about sodomy because he's so much concerned about sodomites. You know,
but I'm not for this today's program, so I'm going to move us on just a little bit. Vitaly, I hear what you're saying.
Are we going to talk about gay issues of Vitaly Milonov or really?
All right, so I'm going to bring all the guests back on topic. We digress, but we're coming back. Malika?
Well, Lena tweets in something that she says is a bigger problem. She says the biggest problem will be what RIA Novosti will be replaced with. It seems there will be a full-blown, she uses the term propaganda outlet for Russia. And Maria, someone else picks up on that. Al-Haji on Twitter says that Moscow's image abroad is anti-Western, it's anti-gay, it's repressive media under a politicized and corrupt court system.
Do you really
Mission impossible. I'd like to hear from Maria now. Maria, what are your thoughts?
First of all, I'd like to tell you that I'm impressed of the level of the English language of Vitaly Milonov, since actually he as far as I remember, he so hates Western world, and at the same time, it turned out that he speaks English well, quite perfect. So my question is, Vitaly, why do you so like English language? Because Vitaly, you speak English perfect.
Maria and Vitaly. Maria, I'm going to say that Vitaly accepts the compliment. Please address the question. Vitaly, stand down for a moment. Maria, go for it.
So are we talking now about gay issues of Vitaly, or are we are talking
We are
about
never going to talk about gay issues of Vitaly again in this program because we do not have time for that. But please address the question. Maria?
Okay, and the question was that actually what is happening right now with RIA Novosti. I really think that, first of all, what I'd like to say that it has nothing to do with changing the way of propaganda. And saying the word propaganda, I mean it in the negative connotation. Nothing changed, really nothing changed. I don't see the point of thinking that RIA Novosti was some liberal media. No, it was the biggest Kremlin agency.
No, the fact was that it was objective.
All right, so let's bring in Mark here. Remember, Mark was a former correspondent at RIA Novosti. Mark, go ahead.
Kevin,
yeah, I agree with Maria. I would agree with Maria in one aspect, that a lot of the Russian liberal media has been completely over the top in their over-evaluation of RIA Novosti. I'm talking about the Russian language service here as some kind of bastion of truth and freedom, when in fact it wasn't. It was headed by a very pro-government loyal director. But the point was that it strived for a certain amount of objectivity, and some of its departments, for example, its legal department, RIA, which really helped to bring home to the public the stark absurdities of the Pussy Riot trial, of the Alexei Navalny trial, for example, and that is not going to happen under Russia Today. And another thing that RIA Novosti also didn't do, it also didn't attempt to create values, which is what Dmitry Kislov has said. Russia Today will attempt to create values, which is something that a news agency shouldn't do at all. But then again, I also agree that it was at times very guilty of self-censorship.
What do you mean by
one
that?
Very illustrative example, which was, well, I'll tell you now. For example, when Alexei Navalny, the de facto leader of the opposition, was released from 15 days in a detention facility in December 2011, he came out and he made a speech how basically he called Putin a big thief and said this thief is being nominated by the Crooks and Thieves Party, which is his nickname for Putin's United Russian Party. We must teach the people of Russia that this man is a criminal and cannot be the leader of our big and wonderful country. Words to those effect. And then at the end he said,
don't spend time about discussing.
I'm discussing what he said. I'm discussing how RIA Novosti covered it, Vitaly.
He was judged, and he is guilty. And
yes, but I'm discussing how RIA Novosti covered it. I'm not saying what Navalny said.
Mark,
I'm discussing how RIA Novosti covered his speech.
Let's talk about Mr. Booth, who is in prison right now, in jail right now, without any evidence.
I'm not
just because
without any evidence.
In a good suit
all right.
from American FBI.
Yes, but I'm not talking about this.
All right, so I'm going to call this to order. Mark, hold up a minute.
So in prison right now.
Vitaly,
just because
I want you to just hold on 1 minute. Maria, please don't start talking, and I have to get Vitaly to stop talking just for a moment. So Vitaly, allow Mark to make his point. He was in the middle of giving us an example.
I wasn't talking about the rights and wrongs of Navalny's speech. I wasn't talking about the rights and wrongs of Navalny's speech.
And again, we're talking about the news agency.
I was talking about the way it was covered by RIA Novosti. And it was covered by RIA Novosti shortly. So Navalny comes out with this inflammatory speech, yeah? And at the end of his speech, he says, by the way, I'd like to thank all my supporters for all the oranges that they sent me whilst I was in jail. And so the English language service, our headline is, our English language service headline is, Navalny calls Putin thief, says, no, I don't remember the exact headline, but you get the idea. We quoted his words, yeah, because he's like the opposition leader. He made a speech about Putin, which wasn't particularly complimentary, and we decided it was newsworthy and gave it back a normal objective report. But the Russian language wire's report was, Navalny thanks his followers for the oranges, which I think says a lot. But it wasn't always like that, yeah? I mean, like I said,
for those who don't,
language service did do a lot of good things. And more importantly, it's the things that they didn't do, that they didn't, like a lot of other state media in Russia, they didn't launch incredibly vicious attacks on opposition people, on gays, on anyone else who happens not to agree with the Kremlin's line on anything at all. Yeah? So I think more importantly that what with the loss of RIA Novosti's Russian language service is that Russian media has been deprived of its right to be neutral and to be objective, or even to strive towards it, which obviously wasn't enough for the Kremlin. But talking about the English language service.
Excuse me.
It was a news agency like any other news agency.
I am just going to jump in with the community, Vitaly, because we've heard a lot from you, and I want to hear a little bit more from the community, and then we come back to you.
Well, I actually want to broaden this discussion out a bit, Kevin. Some people are talking about the media landscape in general. Al-Haji specifically mentions online. He says there's a regimented attitude toward free press. Journalists are silenced with impunity, and authorities legally harass online websites. Now, Kevin, you wrote a piece not too long ago for Global Voices Online. I pulled it up on my screen. Russia's government might block websites for calls to unsanctioned rallies. What's the latest with that? And can you talk about the media landscape online in general?
Yeah, it passed its first reading earlier this week, and so it seems very likely that it will become the law very soon. And what it's ostensibly a response to the riots outside Moscow that occurred in October. There were these ethnic riots that were directed at immigrants from Central Asia and the North Caucasus. Now, this law targets any information online, which shouldn't, I mean, it includes social networks, Facebook, anything that includes calls to rallies that could potentially become ethnic riots. Now, there's a little rider in this law that says that any calls to a rally that is an unsanctioned rally, that is outside the legal order, that could theoretically be included in this ban. So what it would allow the prosecutor general, without any court proceedings, it's extrajudicial, it would allow them to reach out to ISPs and say, you need to close access to this website domain, not just a specific web page, but an entire domain. So if theoretically, if someone posts a Facebook event to an unsanctioned rally, whether or not it's nationalists or not, if it's unsanctioned, in theory, the Russian police could go to all ISPs in Russia and say, you're obligated to shut down access to Facebook right away. And only afterwards do they then reach out to the owners of the sites and try to arrange for the deletion of any offending material.
So, Maria, there seems to be a lot going on as far as media and journalists.
I think blocking Facebook in Russia would cause the biggest riots Russia's seen for years.
So is it feasible, Mark?
What about blocking Facebook?
I was saying, I think any move to block Facebook in Russia would probably have pretty much the entire population of Moscow out on the streets in protest.
Yes.
Since it's all they seem to do half the time.
So, Maria, as a journalist that's based in Russia, what are all these different things saying to you about the media landscape? Is it important? Do people notice? So we've got a new state agency, RIA Novosti, is going. Russia Today is coming in next year. Potential policing of websites as well. What is that saying to you as for your profession in Russia?
Oh, for my profession, my last profession was actually I used to be a press secretary of Duma's deputy of the Russian MP, and I really didn't see any troubles with the freedom of speech in Russia, because I really think that Russia doesn't have troubles with freedom of speech. It has some troubles with finances in media. It has some troubles with really huge troubles with state TV, and it is not allowed to tell some things on the state TV. But who uses these days state TV like the information source? Everybody reads the internet, and this is the source of information. So, I really doubt that there are some catastrophic troubles with the freedom of speech in Russia and the Russian media, and there are some really big troubles with media.
It's not an issue of freedom of speech, though.
Pardon?
It's not an issue of freedom of speech. It's an issue that most people in Russia get their news from the main news agencies on national television, and now they're all going to be like vicious,
it's not
Kremlin,
true.
pro-Putin.
It's
not true. You know, now I agree with Vitaly. Really,
true.
Mark. Yes, really, it's not true, because my grandma reads internet. So, come on.
So we started with Vitaly.
You have a very advanced grandmother. I know lots of grandmothers who don't read the internet.
All right. So,
no, I agree.
Vitaly,
That's a charming anecdote, but I don't think that the polls reflect that as the way most Russians consume their news. I think it's still predominantly television.
Vitaly, when we started this conversation, just give me a moment, guest. Just give me a little space, because I want to bring Vitaly back into the conversation. When we started it, you said this is a domestic issue. Nobody internationally should be paying any attention to this. So domestically, how would you explain what's happening right now with potentially more policing of the internet, with a new Russia Today news agency? What's happening internally, domestically? How would you explain this, Vitaly?
Russian informational field is not covered by Russian RIA Novosti. No, we have lots of informational agencies, and unfortunately some of these agencies are owned by Western owners, and they provide the information which is filtered by the ideological filters. And I'm absolutely sure that anyone in Russia can obtain any information he would like to have. And talking about the specific government information, the percentage of this information is quite weak. Most of the information comes from really independent media. Maybe this is our problem, because, for example, in the United States and in the European Union, most of media comes from one source, which is owned by sodomites, owned by radical liberals, and owned by anti-European forces.
What?
Vitaly, I don't understand your obsession with sodomites, to be honest. Why do you keep talking about them? I mean, well, you made your point. I've heard you talking about like gays, like on many occasions in Russia, but I've never once heard you speak, for example, about I've never once heard you speak for
sodomite.
What? Okay.
Sodomites,
All right, I'm going to wrap up this
about, for example, the horrific rates of HIV
you,
infection in Russia.
Mark, you make a good point.
Which would probably be more.
That point is
which would probably
duly
be
noted.
Which I've said, I don't.
Okay, Mark, that point is duly noted. We are going to wrap up this part of the conversation, but nobody's going anywhere, because we're all going to sit tight, and I'm going to take them all to the post show. I'm going to try not to get back to Vitaly's favourite subject, but we'll be talking about the landscape of state media and media in Russia at stream.aljazeera.com. Malika.
Your last question to Vitaly was about the reasonings behind this.
Yes.
And in the post show, we'll pick up on this tweet. Someone mentions Ukraine. We'll see what that has to do with it.
Okay, really interesting. So next week, we'll be sharing some of our favourite episodes from 2013. And we kick off on Monday with a look at why some black and brown people want to lighten their skin. It's going to be a great conversation. Until then, we'll find you online. Thanks all. Hello again, this is the Streams Online Post Show. We have been talking about why President Vladimir Putin pulled the plug on Russia's main news agency. I'm going to get right back to that conversation. I want to show you, though, a little clip. This is from Russia One. It's one of the state TV networks. This is a reporter reporting from Kiev. You know that there's been protests there for several weeks. The reporter is reporting, and I'll talk you through what happens next. So let's check out and see what's happening here. So he's reporting there in Independence Square. Ooh, he's getting a little award. I'm suggesting that that Oscar might be a little bit tongue-in-cheek. The reporter carries on talking, professional that he is, pushes out the protester, and then eventually accepts the Oscar. I think the protester is trying to say that maybe there might be a little bit of fiction involved there in some of the reporting from state media. Is that a fair comment, Mark, do you think?
Yeah, I'd also like to say, although I realise it's not exactly what we came here to discuss, it's kind of darkly ironic to be talking about the issue of freedom of speech in Russia on a channel funded by Qatar, whose courts have recently jailed a poet called Mohammed al-Ajami for basically a poem that he didn't like for 15 years. I'd like to also point out that even Russia doesn't jail poets and hasn't done for a very long time. And if he happens to be watching, I'd like to appeal to the, take this opportunity to appeal to the Emir of Qatar to free Mohammed al-Ajami, who doesn't deserve to sit in jail for 15 years, no matter what he wrote in a poem.
So this is what happens when you get journalists on the programme.
That's the channel wrong.
I think that's an interesting comment. I'm not talking about that today, but we have talked about that on Al Jazeera and online as well. So let's get back to that comment about...
Yeah, okay, we can move on.
No, why is that really? Why wouldn't we talk about that? And why wouldn't we talk about issues? And actually, the Al Jazeera is the competitor.
Yeah, we don't want to hijack the show. That's not what we're coming to.
Russia Today, for example. Yeah, Russia Today is actually the competitor for Al Jazeera.
But we're all journalists together, and we know that when we come on assignment, we finish the assignment. We're finishing off this assignment. I do hear what you're saying. Our audience just did as well. I'm going to move on for the moment. And Mark, that idea that state media may be reporting fiction? Can you respond to that?
Russian state media, quite a lot of the time, yeah, and kind of it's fairly well known for its
fiction all the time.
And its slanders.
Excuse me, CNN.
Oh yeah, I remember at the height of the anti-Putin protests.
Remember reports from Georgia in 2008, you know. Remember BBC reports from Iraq.
You have a point, Vitaly. I agree with you entirely here.
Fiction. It was a real fiction.
At least Vitaly now talks not about gay people, but about
Maria, really, you really have to start that again. We're not going to be talking about that anymore. It's not relevant for this conversation. Let me just move back to Ukraine, because I know, Malika, online community, you're talking about that issue as well.
They definitely are. And you played that little clip of someone reporting from Kiev. So our community wants to know if there's a link at all to what's happening in Ukraine. Lena tweets in, the point of shutting down RIA Novosti was to spread the message of quote-unquote sovereignty, maintain and consolidate Russian influence, she says. And Kevin, there's a video comment from someone who has similar views. Have a listen to this.
It's obvious. We are witnessing the dawn of the new 21st century version of the Soviet Union. Cozying up with ex-satellite states, controlling the state media, these are just the first few steps to build a new empire. He showed the world that he is loyal to his allies, even when the whole world is against them, e.g. President Assad. This way he can conquer away other unstable countries from the West, e.g. Ukraine.
So Kevin, he uses some pretty strong words there. He says building a new empire, quote unquote. But he also he ends it mentioning Ukraine. Do the protests in Ukraine play any role at all in your view?
Well, I'm not prepared to say that the closing of RIA Novosti is proof that Russia is re-entering its Soviet stage or something like that. I think that's hyperbole. But I do think that right now the Kremlin is responding to sort of twin pressures. One is certainly Euromaidan, and I think that the closure of RIA Novosti is a reflection of that. It's a reflection that Russia's image abroad when it comes to these very important geopolitical issues, the job's not being done well. It's not being done according to how the Kremlin would like it to be done. The other pressure that the Kremlin's responding to is the approaching Olympics in Sochi. And so the two events basically call for the opposite kinds of action from the Kremlin. Now, Euromaidan calls for some sort of crackdown, and that's what I think we're getting with these the new internet law, with the closure of RIA Novosti and so on, and then the various amnesties, which include Masha's amnesty today, and it seems Mikhail Khodorkovsky's amnesty also announced today. I think that's a response.
Amnesty, but pardon.
Pardon. Yes, excuse me. Pardon. Amnesty for Masha and pardon for Khodorkovsky. I think those are. That's an attempt to supplicate the West with the approach of the Olympics. So I think there are these two pressures right now pushing on the Kremlin, and they're responding in different ways.
Maria, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would agree with that, but I also would like to add that actually the change inside the RIA Novosti, inside management of RIA Novosti, has nothing to do with Euromaidan, basically, because it was previously the whole idea created about 2 or 3 months ago among former minister of the media. I'm sorry, I don't know how to translate it. And he actually tried to get rid of the woman in charge of RIA Novosti, the CEO of RIA Novosti, Vladimir Putin. And he somehow created some conspiracy theory against her, and explained Putin that okay, Vladimir Putin is against Russia, something like that. Because now Putin is in a kind of mental state, in a very weird mental state, when he actually believes in some conspiracy theories, but nobody else believes in conspiracy theories, and Milonov is included. He's just a clown right now. That's his role, but he doesn't believe in any conspiracy theory. His friends.
Come on.
Come on! So you believe in
okay. I will let you chat for a number of
really,
minutes.
I don't believe you. Mr. Milonov, I don't believe you. I'm sorry. And nobody believes you. Actually, everybody knows that actually...
So Maria, I'm just going to ask you to just allow Vitaly to retort.
Right now. And excuse me, talking about Ukraine, don't you mind that it is quietly unpolite that a person who is dealing with grilling his barbecue in Arizona now moved his body, this is Senator McCain, to Ukraine to interfere the internal Ukrainian deal,
Mr. Milonov,
political issues, and he is supporting one of the sides. Don't you think that you have to
Maria, hold tight one moment, because I really do want to hear Vitaly.
Because Senator McCain was, before he was Iraq, he was in Libya, and he is guilty because he support bombing of Iraq and Libya and different Arab countries.
Vitaly and Maria, I'm calling time on this part of the conversation.
Is a criminal.
All right, Vitaly, I'm just calling time on this part of the conversation. It's so easy when you talk about the media for the conversation to go in many directions.
Because everyone has an opinion on the media.
You know, you've been discussing about Ukraine.
It's a fairly common pro-Kremlin tactic, actually, and it's not to answer the question, but just to attack someone else.
I don't have a chance to explain myself about Ukraine. You know?
All right, I'm going to ask you very succinctly to explain that, Vitaly.
That many European and American politicians entered Ukraine and supported some bandits, some Nazi followers from Ukraine, those who was supporters of Bandera in Second World War.
Israel,
now they declared as an independent follower.
We are wrapping this part of the conversation up. We're going to wrap it up. Vitaly,
officials follow these Nazi followers. And
Israel and Jewish
calling time on this, and I'm going to bring you back here to the studio. We're going to fade down those microphones just for a moment so we can actually hear Malika. Malika, go ahead.
Well, I will give us, I'll end us with this tweet from Ibrahim, who takes us back to the premise of the show, the freedom of the press, freedom of expression, what it all means. Ibrahim tweets in, most countries have freedom of speech. Freedom after speech is what they don't have. And he doesn't, of course, single out Russia, because that happens many places. But today's conversation will continue online, as it usually does.
Online. That's a good place for the conversation to continue. Mark and Maria, Vitaly and Kevin, thank you so much for being part of this very, very lively, wide-ranging discussion. I really appreciate your time today. So, what will we be doing next time on AJ Stream? Well, we'll be sharing some of our favourite episodes from 2013, and we kick off on Monday with a look at why some black and brown people want to lighten their skin. Do you remember that conversation?
It's a fascinating one.
It really was, and that continued online for a very long time. So we will see you online, we will see you at the AJ Stream looking at that issue, but you won't see us live again until, well, after the holiday. So if you're celebrating, whichever holiday you're celebrating, happy holidays from me, happy Christmas in particular. Malika?
Have a good week.
That's it? That's all you got?
And Merry Christmas.
Yes, season greetings. We'd play music, but we don't have any music. It's great to have had you here along with the AJ Stream team. We love having you. Thank you for being part of our community. You know where we will find us, holiday or no holiday, always online. Take care.